God chose Israel to light the whole world. Satan has spent all of human history trying to put that light out.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into a deeply fascinating theological study. It's a document that takes thousands of years of complex human history and completely reframes the whole thing. It presents this idea of a singular, ongoing, cosmic battle fought directly over the nation of Israel. So instead of looking at history as just a bunch of random political shifts or cultural trends, this study argues there is a highly coordinated, multi-generational campaign operating entirely behind the scenes. We're going to unpack exactly how the author maps out this relentless spiritual war, strictly using the framework provided right in the text. The text roots this massive premise in two very specific anchor scriptures. First up is Genesis 12:3. This is where God promises Abraham that in him all the families of the earth will be blessed. The study zeroes in on the Hebrew word for families used here, mishpachot. It means intimate kinship groupings. We're talking about every single tribe, every household on earth. Then Isaiah 49:6 establishes the real cosmic stakes. Israel was given this calling to be the literal channel of God's blessing and salvation to the world, a light to the Gentiles. The document argues that the adversary grasped the cosmic weight of this instantly. He realized right then and there that if Israel succeeded, his dominion over the nations would be completely dismantled. To lay all this out, the source document builds its epic thesis across 12 distinct sections. It systematically traces a historical campaign specifically designed to extinguish that divine light. The author methodically moves from that initial calling, right through various eras of historical corruption, all the way to a final prophesied resolution. Now that's an incredible amount of information to process, but we are going to distill this vast timeline down to its absolute core elements so you can clearly see the underlying structure of the argument. All right, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to break this down into 5 distinct phases. Number 1, the divine calling. 2, corruption from within. 3, silencing the messengers. 4, the ultimate deception. And finally, number 5, final refining and restoration. Let's get right into it. Phase 1, the divine calling. This establishes the profound target placed right on Israel's back from the exact moment God made his promise to Abraham. The study argues that Satan understood perfectly well the threat Israel posed to his earthly dominion. So he didn't just attack them randomly. Instead, he deployed 5 distinct weapons across every era of history to stop Israel from fulfilling her calling. The text insists we can actually trace these exact methods, from internal temptation to military destruction to false prophecy, demonic infiltration, and ultimately blinding Israel to her own Messiah. It's a playbook that repeats over and over, adapting to the culture of the day, but always maintaining that singular goal of putting out Israel's light. You might be wondering, why was extinguishing that light so absolutely crucial? Well, according to the text, it all goes back to Deuteronomy 4:6. Israel's adherence to a divinely ordered society, their justice, their laws, their care for the vulnerable, it was meant to be so distinctively superior that it would irresistibly draw the Gentile nations toward God. The surrounding nations were supposed to look at Israel and literally say, "Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people." The study points out that the adversary quickly figured out that the most effective attack wasn't military at all, it was spiritual. Because if Israel could be corrupted to look exactly like the surrounding pagan nations, their whole testimony would be destroyed. Phase 2, corruption from within. This is where things get really fascinating, looking at how the adversary pivoted his methods when direct external attacks just weren't working. This study outlines an ingenious historical maneuver that it calls the Balaam strategy. You see, when the prophet Balaam was hired to externally curse Israel, God stepped in and prevented it. So the strategy shifted. If you can't curse them from the outside, you corrupt them from the inside. Let's walk through this timeline really quick. It started in the plains of Moab with seduction into idolatry. It manifested boldly at Mount Sinai when the Israelites, after just 40 days, traded the very glory of God for a golden calf. It then became institutionalized
Christians during the monarchy with idol worship at the high places and continued on secretly into the 8th century BC. The text makes it clear these weren't just a bunch of unrelated sins. This was a multi-generational, highly effective blueprint.
To diagnose the utter catastrophe of this internal corruption, the text zeroes in on a very specific Hebrew word, havel. It translates to emptiness, vapor, or vanity. The study points out that by walking after the empty vapor of idolatry, Israel effectively became just as empty. Think about it. An empty vessel has absolutely no contents to pour out. By adopting the exact same practices as the nations around them, they lost their distinctive light and, for a time, neutralized their own cosmic calling.
And this next comparison brilliantly illustrates just how deep that deception went. The study contrasts two stars. In both Amos and Acts, the Bible condemns Israel for carrying the Star of Remphan, which is a pagan six-pointed star associated with Saturn worship, right into their solemn assemblies. The text powerfully contrasts this hidden pagan idol with the true, promised Star of Jacob, identified later in Revelation as Jesus Christ, the bright and morning star. The author highlights this as a tragic historical substitution. It was a masterpiece of adversarial deception, hidden right in plain sight.
Phase 3. Silencing the messengers. The crucial takeaway here is that to maintain this massive national level of deception, anyone trying to sound the alarm had to be silenced. To show us how deeply this infiltration penetrated, the study points to actual demonic occupations taking place right inside Israel's synagogues during the time of Christ. Look at this verse from Luke. An unclean spirit cries out, "Let us alone. What have we to do with thee?" The study emphasizes those plural words, us and we. This wasn't just some random, isolated spirit. This was a highly coordinated collective network of unclean entities occupying the very places of religious instruction. And they were terrified because the Holy One had finally arrived to displace them and restore that light.
But the sabotage went way beyond demonic occupation. The study notes that Satan didn't just silence and kill the true prophets who tried to warn Israel. He actively replaced them with counterfeits. So while the true prophets were mocked, misused, and killed, a demonically empowered system of false prophets rose up. The document brings in a quote from Ezekiel describing how these false voices plastered over the spiritual cracks of the nation with what's called untempered mortar. They were basically preaching a false peace, granting a kind of fake divine approval over the very idolatry that was actively destroying the nation's calling.
Phase 4. The ultimate deception. Let's look at what the document identifies as Satan's single greatest, albeit temporary, victory against Israel's divine calling. Because of centuries of engineered religious formalism and false prophecy, the study explains that Israel was conditioned into a state of profound spiritual blindness. So when the actual Messiah, the complete fulfillment of their entire calling, finally arrived on the scene, they completely failed to recognize him. As John 1:11 bluntly states, he came unto his own, and his own received him not. The text emphasizes that we shouldn't view this as mere stubbornness. No, it was a specifically engineered spiritual blindness, constructed meticulously over millennia. The text then points out a truly remarkable detail regarding the Passion Week. Satan actually didn't delegate this particular task. According to Luke 22, he personally possessed Judas to engineer the crucifixion of Christ. But here is the massive cosmic irony based on 1 Corinthians 2:8. By orchestrating the crucifixion, the adversary unwittingly triggered the exact atonement event that would eventually dismantle his own kingdom and open up salvation to all the families of the earth. His greatest tactical victory literally became his strategic undoing. Following this rejection of the Messiah, the study outlines some frankly devastating consequences. Israel faced the diaspora, a profound scattering among the nations. The author argues that this scattering was ruthlessly exploited by the adversary. Here, anti-Semitism is reframed. It's not seen just as racial or political hatred, but as a cross-cultural, entirely irrational, and deeply demonic rage. The goal?
to permanently eradicate the specific people God chose to be his channel of blessing. The underlying objective has always been exactly what Psalm 83 describes, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. Phase 5, Final Refining and Restoration. The study insists that this long, dark period is absolutely not the end of the story. Let's explore how the text believes God is ultimately going to resolve this epic cosmic war. The document directly addresses the prophesied future tribulation, and it reframes it beautifully using Zechariah 13. It presents this not as some act of divine abandonment or wrathful hatred, but as a severe yet loving, refining fire. The text explains the imagery here. Refining silver means this fire is specifically designed to burn away centuries of accumulated satanic deception, pagan idolatry, and spiritual blindness. The heat is intense, but the purpose is preserving and purifying the precious metal underneath. And that refining process leads directly to what the study calls the supreme spiritual outcome. In a sudden, dramatic reversal, Zechariah prophesies a moment where a spirit of grace is poured out. The veil of blindness is finally completely lifted. Israel recognizes the pierced Christ, and they mourn in true repentance. The text argues that in this single sovereign moment, the greatest deception in human history is permanently dissolved, and the entire nation is spiritually reborn in a day. This entire promise of restoration is anchored in a concept the text calls ahava olam. It's a gorgeous Hebrew phrase from Jeremiah that translates to an immovable, everlasting covenant love. The study places huge emphasis on the fact that this love spans the ages. It simply cannot be exhausted, and it certainly cannot be canceled out by any temporal opposition. It outlasts every single satanic strategy ever deployed over the last 3,000 years. The stunning synthesis of this entire study culminates in a future vision from the prophets. After all the diaspora, all the persecution, and all the deception, there is a total reversal. Zechariah envisions a time when 10 men from all different languages and nations will literally grab hold of the garment of a Jewish person, begging to go with them, simply because the presence of God is so undeniable. An entirely purified Israel finally and permanently becomes that irresistible light to the Gentiles they were always called to be. The author concludes the study by looking at Romans 11:29. God's gifts and calling are without repentance, which means they are completely unchangeable and irrevocable. The ultimate takeaway here is that no amount of historical failure, no amount of internal corruption, and no meticulously crafted adversarial sabotage can ever force God to change his mind or revoke that original promise he made to Abraham. The calling remains completely secure.
It really is a staggering theological framework, tracing a single unbroken through line across thousands of years of incredibly complex history. It leaves us with a lot to chew on. If human history truly is a battlefield for this ultimate cosmic calling, and if these ancient strategies are still actively at play behind the scenes, how does that perspective entirely reshape the way we view the conflicts, the ideologies, and the literal headlines we see happening in the world right now? Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll see you on the next explainer.